The most existential question in crypto. What will be the relationship between tokens and communities? A Twitter thread by Danny Zuckerman. At stake, can DAOs bring virtue back to scaled organization, or will they accelerate the economics-only mentalities that have been corroding society? Why the knife's edge? Money and communities typically mix poorly. Not all networks need to be communities. Some are purely economic and production-oriented, and that's fine. This is for those that aspire to maintain values beyond economic self-interest. First, the unhappy and unpopular path. Tokens insert market mentalities into every group, which crowds out all non-financial motivations. Every community evolves into a profit-maximizing network, meaning all community values are eroded and economic self-interest spreads even further. Why might tokens crowd out other values? Humans are motivated by different factors in different contexts. Markets are governed by self-interest and mediated by money. Communities and cultures are governed by reputation, value alignment, and norms. They often can't coexist. Introducing new incentives changes our framing and activates different motivations. A famous example: an Israeli school added fines for late pickups, and late pickups actually skyrocketed. The money fined crowded out the guilt that had made more parents on time before and implicitly condoned tardiness. Here's another example. Are you more likely to help a neighbor move if they A. ask as a favor, or B. offer $25? Likely A. The money introduced in B reframes it from a social interaction to a market one, and $25 may not be enough to be worth it. The neighborly instinct is crowded out. Though if the neighbor offered to supply good beer, we're much more likely to jump to help. These are not isolated cases. Economic, community, and cultural motivations are highly interactive, complex, and powerful. Incentives frequently backfire because this isn't well enough understood. So what does this mean for communities, and how should they view tokens? D. Hawk, founder of Visa, provides a better warning than I can. If we were to set out to design an efficient system for the methodical destruction of community, we could do no better than our present efforts to monetize all value and to reduce life to the tyranny of measurement. Money, markets, and measurement have their place. They are important tools indeed. We should honor and use them, but they do not deserve the deification their apostles demand of us, before which we too readily sink to our knees. Only fools worship their tools. Done rashly, introducing tokens will turn communities into markets. While markets are seen as efficient, this would be a huge loss for both community values and effectiveness. First, values and ethics. Markets erode morality, and not just in predictable ways. Researchers tested subjects' willingness to kill mice, first in a base scenario, then in market framing. Predictably, kill rates rose dramatically. Even more troubling, when subjects were switched back to the original non-market framing, they were far more likely to kill the mice than originally. The market framing, once introduced, stuck. Once market mentalities crowd out other motivations, we can't just go back. Even if we care only about efficiency, markets are likely a step down from community in many cases. We constantly confuse things we can measure with things that have value. We make changes that destroy hard-to-explain value in the name of order, attribution, and neat models. Here's an example from Seeing Like a State, as reviewed by Slate Star Codex. An intact forest might be more productive than an evenly spaced rectangular grid of Norway spruce, but it was harder to legislate rules for, or to assess taxes on, so the forest was wiped out for less effective grids. This pattern repeats everywhere in all kinds of logically centralized organizations. It is behind national identity systems like tax collection, bureaucratic reporting structures in large companies, and pre-planned cities with perfect structure and zero vitality. The centralized state wanted the world to be legible or arranged in a way that made it easy to monitor and control. And so we gradually transitioned from systems that were messy but full of fine-tuned hidden order to ones that were barely functionable but really easy to tax. Communities are full of deep intrinsic motivation and hidden order. Not all of them can be plotted, attributed, and measured. Tokens can add legibility and direct incentives, but they can also wipe out far more powerful organizing principles in the process. Will attempts to quantify and reward community activity crowd out the non-financial motivations that make a community so valuable and productive in the first place? Again, D. Hawk says it better than I can. There can be no civil society worthy of the name without true community. In fact, there can be no life without it. All life and all earthly systems are closed cycles of giving and receiving of the non-monetary exchange of value, save only that the gift of energy that comes from the sun. When we monetize value, we have a means of measurement, however misleading, that allows us to calculate the relative efficiency of each part of the system. It doesn't occur to us that efficiency is often ineffective, that we may be destroying an extremely effective system whose values we cannot measure in order to calculate the efficiency of an ineffective system. It doesn't occur to us that attempting to engineer mechanistic societies and institutions based on mathematical measurement may be fundamentally flawed. As the popular dictum declares, what gets measured is what gets done, and that is precisely the problem, for it requires that much more important values be ignored. The nightmare would be that DAOs do rise only to accelerate the dominance of shareholder return over all other values. They are efficient and open to all, but for what? What makes sense for financial networks is not necessarily good for non-economic relationships. Imagine tokenizing a relationship with a spouse. Cleaning is worth X and cooking is worth Y. The result might be fair and efficient, but it would also eliminate every chance to build trust, understanding, and appreciation. It would turn an intimate relationship into an economic one. Communities are many-person relationships. Tokenizing communities could lead to more fair and effective coordination, but will it eventually erode the trust, shared values, and culture that let the community form? And would it help it get through any hard times? If all this seems doomsday, consider that there is very recent precedent in social media. Facebook and Twitter began by democratizing communication. Only over time did we realize the true impact. All speech became performative. Every message and post was an opportunity to build status. Tokens begin by giving communities incentive powers. Over time, might they turn all our groups economic? Will every interaction be only a chance to build wealth? It depends on whether tokens can be more than financial. Can they represent or coexist with other motivations? That takes us to a happier scenario. Companies preserve their values and use tokens to coordinate at scale better than companies or governments ever could. Value-driven communities could become the world's most powerful coordinators, enabling us to optimize for more than economic gain. This is definitely possible and powerful. Ethereum has maintained community value alongside economic power. Smaller ones, like friends with benefits, too. But it's hard and early, and it will get much harder over time as the values at stake grow and the original believers are diluted. The key, I think, is that the community must remain stronger than the economic rewards, and not in a soft, aspirational way. There must be more motivation and agency built into the community layer 0 than there is economic motivation built into the crypto economics in layer 1. If economics, motivations, and accessibility become stronger than the community values, behaviors will begin to skew towards pure economic maximization. As prices increase and the network of stakeholders grows faster than the original community, this gets extremely likely. And remember that even a little economic incentive can switch participants from social to economic frames, crowding out other motivations. So how can community values be preserved with more strength than the economic layer? I'm not sure, but my hypothesis is that one promising route is to create cognitive separations between the community motivations and the measurable economic reward. Like the neighbor persuading you to help them move with beer instead of money. There can be rewards in a community. They just have to be designed in a way that they don't trigger members into a market mindset. What might this look like? Here are a few ideas. 1. Make community tokens look less like money. Non-fungibility, non-transferability, limited liquidity, and penalties for norm violations could all work. The token can still hold value, but it is less likely to attract value-dilutive speculators or be viewed as a purely economic asset. 2. Maintain subjectivity and access to the community, decisions with it, and rewards. Keeping governance in the social layer rather than on-chain could preserve the importance of reputation, norms, and communication, things that make it a community rather than an economic block. 3. Fit token distribution to community goals. Some communities should aim for less decentralization. Token centralization in the founders and earliest members may preserve early values. In a world of many overlapping communities, diversity of influence is good. Leaders matter. 4. Bundle with products and services. Lenny Rashitsky's paid newsletter unlocks access to a community that is frankly more valuable than the content. It's all subscribers of curious product builders. If the community itself were paid, it would most likely be full of networkers and headhunters. Communities that successfully ossify their values strongly enough will be able to use tokens to achieve incredible things. Organizations with global scale, ultra-low coordination costs, fully aligned incentives, and intrinsic and extrinsic motivators in pursuit of shared goals and values. As Vitalik said, even $1 billion of capital cannot compete with a project having a soul. Preserving both will be incredibly hard and incredibly powerful for those who do. I am hugely bullish on DAOs and communities using tokens. This paradigm could change the world. But it's still far from a given, and in my opinion, there are very real dangers and big and interesting questions that deserve more share of voice. If 15 years from now we've collateralized our communities, monetized our reputations, and turned every digital interaction into a transaction, then we might all be wealthier, but we'll be a hell of a lot worse off. That's not an impossible outcome if we're not careful. 10 years ago, the dominant narrative around Facebook was that it had created connection and opportunity all over the globe. Let's not be Facebook. Instead, let's experiment and see what works in preserving and extending communities without undermining them. Move fast and test things, but not break them. Some failures can't be easily reversed. Tokenized communities can be the most value-driven and effective organizations we've ever had. To realize that, we need to be extremely intentional about social capital. Representing it too much like financial capital may erode its power rather than capture leverage and influence. DAOs are likely to be the killer app of crypto and outcompete traditional institutions. Whether they are a force for good or for economic gain depends on whether the design favors preserving and advancing community values or capturing value for the community. Thanks to the many who unwittingly inspired these thoughts with their writing or work. Any useful ideas are stolen from them. All flaws are mine.